The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher is produced in the first instance as a radio show, and it's aired on stations around Australia. Due to music licensing restrictions, copyright-protected music tracks in this podcast edition have either been replaced with royalty-free alternatives or removed entirely.
The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher.
Well, hi everyone. Welcome back to the show. Great to have you back with us again this week. I hope you've had a great one, and I hope you're looking forward to spending the next hour with us as we tell a couple of great stories this week. Really looking forward to talking to our two guests that we've got on. Clearsignal.com.au, of course, is the website. You'll find all of our contact details there, and as always, if you'd like to get in touch with me, that's the best way to do it. A couple of interesting topics to explore this week. Coming up a little bit later, tell me, what do you think of motorcycling? Do you own a motorcycle? So I'll put my hand up and say I do. In fact, right now in my garage, I've got two of them. But I've got to say, in these busy times, particularly if you live in an urban area, it can be quite hazardous. And we hear quite often, of course, that motorcyclists are somewhat overrepresented in crash statistics and even worse in fatalities and all that sort of stuff. So how do we get that road safety message out to people, not only if you're a motorcyclist yourself, but also to road users in general? Because let's face it, we're all out there sharing the road. We all pay our registration, and it's incumbent upon all of us to practice good road safety. I'm going to be talking to Damien Codognotto a bit later on in the show. He's from the Motorcycle Riders Association of Australia, and we'll be discussing a lot of these topics and a few others as well. But first up, one of the central themes of this show, and you'll see it in the taglines if you hit the website, of course, is that everybody has a story. Everyone has a story. And in some cases, that person might be pretty well known in public life. And we've been pretty fortunate to have a few people in recent months on the show as guests who would fit that description. But then, of course, there are people who, might not necessarily be household names, but still in all have the most wonderful life stories to tell. And it really is a joy to be able to come on here on the radio and tell those stories. My first guest this week is likely someone who fits into that latter category. He is an extraordinary man and in every way a community leader, and in fact, someone who's made enormous contributions that way over many decades. Now, it's not his way to stand up and thump his chest, I can tell you that much. In fact, true to form, when I approached him to appear on the show this week, he wasn't really sure that his story was really anything special and worth telling. But, that in itself really speaks volumes. His name is Jim Read, and he spent his life in the service of his community, not only in a professional role as a Victoria Police member, but also in a volunteer capacity as a firefighter in the state's Country Fire Authority, recently, in fact, receiving an award for 55 years of continuous service. So indeed, I think we have a lot to talk about. Jim, welcome.
Thanks very much, Steve. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, I'm just thinking, Jim, I should either be Jim or Captain Read, because I should point out to people that I used to be a firefighter myself, and when I joined in 1995, you were in fact my first brigade captain, and that's how we know each other. It's been a very long time.
It was, but it's a partnership that's lasted a long time, Steve, and we've kept in contact right throughout your varied careers and mine. So that's great.
Now, I'm not really sure where to start, but would you describe yourself as a copper with a firefighting habit or a firefighter with a law enforcement habit, or is there a bit of elements of both, do you think?
Well, I actually joined the CFA first in 1969 as a junior at Mount Evelyn, and then I joined the police force as a cadet in 1973. So I suppose I was a fiery before I was a copper, Steve.
Yeah, okay. Well, look, let's start with the policing side of it first. You have had a long career with Victoria Police, retiring in recent years at the rank of sergeant. And what was it, Jim, about 40-odd years in the job? Yeah,
43 and a bit. Yeah, so and I loved every minute of it, Steve. It was just a ringside seat to the greatest show on earth, and I met some of the nicest people in my life, and you're one of them, and lots of others too. So I enjoyed my career. I enjoyed going to work. I enjoyed working with my people. I enjoyed the fact that each morning when you went to work, you didn't know what you're going to do for the day, where you're going to end up, and what time you'd be coming home. And that was very special to me, because I know some people like to have a routine and everything else, but I'm not that person. So policing was right up my alley.
So starting in the police cadets at the age of 16, do Victoria, do they still have cadets now, the police? I'm not sure if they do.
No, they don't. No, they abandoned that in about 1989 or 1988, somewhere around there, and just concentrated on recruiting people and going straight into the police academy as young, mature adults.
It's kind of a shame in a way, I think, that they've done that, because I would imagine that something like the cadets would be a fantastic recruiting tool, even if they still had it today.
Absolutely. And when we joined up in 1973, it brought together mostly country kids. Most of them had been farmers' boys, working out in. They were self-supporting or self-sufficient kids or young men, because they didn't have women in those days. But most of the people that came into the police academy were their own person by the age of 16, where they could look after themselves, talk about themselves, handle themselves, and if things came up, they could work the problem out and work through it. And I think that's the right sort of people that we had.
You talk about being in the fire brigade prior to that. So there's really a theme there, I guess, in your family going back of service to your community, service more widely. I mean, did your parents have any influence on that?
So Mum was in charge of the GFS, or the Girls Friendly Society, and she was very much into the church. So there was Sunday school, the Church of England Boys School, or SEBS, that society that we were all in amongst. But she was also good with lots of other kids from around the Lilydale area, Lilydale, Mount Evelyn. She played the organ at lots of people's weddings, funerals, and all those sorts of things. She was just out there. And Dad was a busy man. We run a taxi service in Mount Evelyn, and he didn't have time to be, I suppose, out a lot. But what he did do is he was a high-class shooter, both small bore and large bore, and he shot for Victoria and for Australia. So when he was with the Lilydale Small Bore Club, he used to encourage all the young kids to come along and try it out. And then again, when he was shooting his large bore at Lilydale and then later on at Merton Rifle Range, he was trying to get a lot of young kids into the sport. It's a dying sport now, I know, but he tried to get all those sort of kids into that sport to give them something to achieve. And, and he did very well. In fact, he grew the Merton Rifle Club to a stage where they had not only one team but two teams, and that was pretty unheard of in those days, back in the 70s and 80s.
And the key message there, I think, too, is, Jim, that community service can take so many different forms. And some of us might strap on the uniform and go into some sort of uniform service or join a volunteer service like CFA or SES or similar branches in other states. But there are many ways that you can be a community leader.
Absolutely. And it's, as you said, you don't have to be a high-profile person. You just have to be a person that works away with a plan to help others in the community, irrespective of age, religion, or anything else. You're just, just working for people.
Now, you talk about being a country kid, and I know that you say you grew up in Mount Evelyn, which for our interstate listeners is in the east of Melbourne, over in the Dandenongs, a beautiful part of the world. And I know you've moved around from there subsequently, both when you were growing up and in later years as well. But, of course, Mount Evelyn is where it all started. So what really was the attraction? How did that all start? I
started back in Mount Evelyn when I was a young fella. Fire station was over the road. And because we owned a taxi service, Steve, we were always had our phone manned with either mum or dad or someone working from our house. So the fire brigade put a fire reporting service, or an FRS, into our place, because they knew that when the fire calls came in from the public that there would be someone there to answer them. The system was local back in those days, as opposed to Triple O and all that we have today. But mum and dad run the fire service. They could activate the fire siren from home. What would happen was that people would ring up, report a fire. The people, whoever answered the call at our place, would write it down on a piece of paper. They would set the siren off, and then I would run across the road to the fire station and then hand the captain or whoever turned up where they were going, what they were doing, and any other notes. So that's where my interest first came. Yeah, so I was just a young colt running across the road with a piece of paper in my hand from the FRS pad, and give that to the fireys, and away they went.
It's interesting. It's an interesting, familiar story because my father was in the fire brigade in the 1970s at Scoresby, and I want to talk about the Scoresby Fire Brigade in a little while, but I remember him doing the same thing. The siren would go off and Dad would drop everything and off he'd go and run off and you wouldn't see him for hours.
That still happens to this day in this house.
Yeah, it still does. Although these days, I guess it's all done on pages these days. It's all it's not even pages anymore, I think, is it? It's an app on your phone or something.
Pager is the central issue for alerting fireys, and the reason we use pagers as our central issue is because it's run by satellite, and as you know, as CFA is right across Victoria, and there's a lot of fireys that live up in the areas where there are no mobile phone connections, and they still have to be able to respond to fires. So it comes via satellite, and that's the way it works. Because nowadays, you know that if we have no power, then the phone services can close down like they did in Mount Dandenong and a couple of years back in the big storm. So the pager is essentially it, but there's a backup system called SAS, which is run by Emergency Management Victoria, which activates CFA and SES volunteers.
It's very common when you're out on the fire ground and you're working a particular incident that you'll be working with other agencies, the police, of course, the ambulance service and other agencies such as that. Was it through doing that the interest in joining Victoria Police, the interest there was sparked first up, or was it something else?
We didn't have a lot of interaction with the police when we were working at fires up at Tolmy.
I guess not, no.
Back at Mansfield there, but... No, the reason I became enthralled in policing is my dad's best mate was Ron Fletcher. He was a policeman at Mount Evelyn, and every year they would have a week-long trip fishing up at Lake Yukonbean. And Ron was such a good man, although he did kick me in the bum once for hanging around the railway station a bit and sent me home. But he was a lovely man, and I liked him a lot, and I think that's where my love of policing grew.
I want to come back to the fire service in a few minutes, Jim, because that's a common theme for both of us. But policing is always something that's fascinated me. I always imagined that had I become a Victoria police officer, then the concept of being out there as a country copper, perhaps in a small regional community, that really, I think, would have been a really wonderful job. You've been a city copper and, of course, a country copper as well. Do you have a preference that way?
Yeah, country policing is much better than city policing. Mostly because you get to know your community, you live in the community, and you work in that community, but you form relationships, and you know those that are doing it hard, those that might not be 100% down the line of straightness and niceness, so you can keep an eye on those. And but at the same time, country people are wonderful people because they, like I said, they're resilient people. They have to work most of their problems out on their own, or they work through them because services are not that close to them. But I enjoyed worked at Wangaratta. I did 10 years there. I was the officer in charge of Dedarang and Yakandanda at the same time for a period of time. And, I loved it up there. It was great.
The clear signal.
You're listening to The Clear Signal, and Tom Jones and the Cardigans there from the album Reload, and burning down the house indeed. I tell you what, I've seen a few burning down houses in my time as a firefighter, and I can tell you what, so is this man, Jim Read, a long-time CFA volunteer here in Victoria and also a career Victoria Police member, and we're picking up his story here now as he moves from the country into Melbourne, and that's a pretty interesting story in itself, Jim. I believe you spent some time at D24, which was the old Police Communications Centre. I know that's done differently these days. What was it like working in that environment back then? I guess with the technology too, it would have been far different to what we're used to seeing these days.
Oh, yeah, she was all analogue and HF and all those sorts of things in those days. And when we went from 5 channels, 4 during the day and from 6 o'clock till 2 a.m. Each night, we used to open another channel, and it was So that was it. But when I first went there in 1985, it wasn't really that busy. It wasn't that flat out. It was constant, and you were looking after 20 through to 50 units on the road at any one time. I used to look after Frankston and Dandenong and all that, and they can be hubs of intense activity, but generally we worked away and it was busy. You never had 30 seconds to think to yourself, but you were going.
I suppose the pressure there too is you're in a decision-making role there, aren't you? Like you've got to work on the information that's coming into you and make decisions on how you're going to deploy resources and all that sort of stuff. That would present quite some interesting challenges at times.
It was. That was so when we first went to, I went to D24, we didn't have our supervising sergeant on the road or a supervising senior sergeant. We had a duty officer, but most of the decisions were made by the operator of D24. And the sergeant on the channel, or even sometimes the constable on the channel, would be coordinating resources, asking for this, asking for that. And it was pretty much a logistics gathering job to get these jobs done. So if you had a car accident, you needed tow trucks, you needed ambulance. If you had a semi-trailer involved, you'd need heavy-duty haulage, or you'd have to get a crane, and all those sorts of things. So you had lots of, and of course you had the whole spectrum of jobs from crime through to accidents. And the poor old Sarge there would be trying to keep his resources, available enough to get the job done, but enough to have enough for response. So yeah, the Sarge would be making a lot of decisions on the channel.
And of course, back in those days, D24 was based at the old Russell Street Police Headquarters in central Melbourne. Now, of course, in 1985, that was subject to what would be classed these days really as a terrorist incident where obviously there was a very well-known bombing. A police member lost her life. I believe that you were working in that branch at that time, but on that day were lucky enough to be on an RDO.
Yeah, the RDO was because it was my wedding anniversary, Steve.
Well, there you go. Oh.
Yeah, so I had the day off, luckily, and the next morning I went into work, and it was quite a different scene inside the office. We had there was 10 different rows of channels that were working away, but we didn't have any windows in the place. All the windows were gone because we faced on to the Magistrates Court, and the compression of the explosion just below us when the car blew out our windows. It blew out all the windows in the Magistrates Court too, and that caused a lot of injuries, a lot of shrapnel injuries to members. There was all curtains were torn. There was chairs with shards of glass embedded in them, and I think we're very, very lucky that the injury tally was not a lot more.
What was describe the atmosphere around Victoria Police generally? I mean, that would have been an incident, even if it happened today, would shake any organisation like that to its core. But I don't think here in Victoria it was something that we would have perhaps ever contemplated happening. And I know it shocked the community more widely, but it must have really, really shaken up Victoria Police at that time.
I think it was. It's probably like the siege of Ballarat. That this was the first major attack on law enforcement in history of Victoria, and it did shake a lot of people because I suppose it woke us up to the fact that we're not immune from attacks like that, because prior to that, well, in my lifetime anyway, there hadn't been anything of this particular nature. There'd been, some people taking pot shots at police members over the years, but to have an organised car bomb, that luckily enough didn't all explode at the one time. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. But well, I wasn't there on the day, I suppose. But a lot of others would have been injured. But that was a wake-up call to our own security. And after that, there was a lot more security put on police stations and other events where we started to look at our risks right across the board. So where we would go out to schools and all those sorts of things, and just do that. Once that bomb had gone off at Russell Street, then when we did go out to schools and all that, schools were looked at us strange when we would arrive and be armed with firearms and all that sort of stuff. So it was a big change in policing.
And you went on to spend an extended amount of time at Glen Waverley, which is in eastern Melbourne, probably a little bit closer to the city, and I guess a different environment again there, working, suburban policing and all of the issues that to go with that. As you say, you're talking about Dandenong and Frankston. In a way, it's not all that far from those areas, so I imagine it would have got quite interesting at times.
Yeah, well, that's where we spent most of our work. As soon as we would start work, back in those days, we were in a district called P District, which covered Dandenong and Doveton and all those areas there, which were the socio-economics there were different to what they were in Glen Waverley and Mount Waverley. So, of course, there was a little bit more crime there than in our area. And most of the time, our cars spent all their time down at Doveton or in Noble Park, Springvale and all that doing work. And as the Sarge there, you had to make sure that you still have enough to respond to the calls in Mount Waverley, Glen Waverley and Chadstone.
Yeah.
So you're always juggling your resources, but a lot of that Dandenong area took up a lot of those resources.
Jim, actually, interestingly, I actually spent 3 years in the local tech school across the road there. I would have been surprised if that school didn't generate a fair bit of business for the local police station across the road.
They were devastated when you left, Steve. They pulled it down after you went.
They sure did.
But they did keep a section of it, and that's all part of the Monash Special Development School now. So, so once again, it's caring for the community. And but the old tech school that you went to, they pulled that down when you left.
Yeah, well, probably a good thing too. Jim, let's talk about the Scoresby Fire Brigade. Scoresby in eastern Melbourne again, a little suburb. It's my hometown. It's where I grew up. As I mentioned, my father was in that brigade. In 1995, I joined the brigade, and that's where I met you. And interestingly, I actually didn't know you were a police member at that time. The way I found that out, and I'll admit this to you now 30 years later, is I'd sort of qualified to get on the truck, and the first call came in. So it's late at night. I've jumped in my car and probably set the land speed record to get down there. I think I passed about half a dozen other members on the way to the station, and one of them pulled me aside and said, Reedy, he's a copper, and he's worded up all the local coppers here, so just tone that driving down a little bit.
It was your youthful enthusiasm, Steve.
It certainly was. It was a rush of blood the first time you get to go out and do that.
You turned out to be an excellent firefighter, and I was very sad when you left the brigade, but you were chasing other things in your life, and I was very jealous of you when you started driving locos, mate, and very fast trains that the Victoria Railways or PTV have these days.
Yes, I am
jealous, man.
I didn't know until many years later that you were not only a plane nut, which of course all good people should be, but also a railway enthusiast. We might talk about that in a few minutes. But
I'm a Gunsel too,
Yeah, well, most people, it takes a lot to admit that. Actually, a lot of.
Yeah. So you made my day when I was speaking to you once, and I was up at my daughter's place at Harcourt, and you said, I'm doing the Bendigo train this afternoon. And I said, right. So that's when I met you on the bridge at Harcourt, remember?
Yeah, I do remember that.
It was wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yes, good times. The Scoresby Fire Brigade, in terms of the Country Fire Authority, I think too in terms of volunteer brigades in general, it's quite a unique station with a really unique culture. And it seems to me that it survived as a volunteer brigade in an area that was once fairly rural. I know it certainly was when I was growing up there in the 70s and the 80s, but these days it's quite industrialised. It's quite urbanised, I guess, is what I'm trying to get across. So the concept of having a strong, a well-resourced volunteer brigade really speaks volumes for how that brigade works.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, it's been a busy brigade. We went from, when I arrived there in 85 after I came down from Wangaratta, we were doing about 200 calls a year, and then it went up to around about 650. But it's pared back a bit with better alarms that are not going off every 20 seconds. And of course, we're surrounded by the 3 brigades from the Fire and Rescue Victoria, with 31 up at Wheelers Hill, and Bronya, which is 85, and then 86, which is Roval, and they help us out all the time. So it's still a team sport, but I like the resilience of the volunteers at Scoresby is amazing. Like when you're doing 600 calls a year and you're out the door, twice a day on average, but sometimes you can have 10, 12 calls in a day and then might not have a call for a couple of days. But we built a truck there called the Hose Layer, Steve, which you've been on yourself. And its job is to lay an above-ground water main at larger fires. And those calls you can leave home at 10 o'clock at night and not get home till midday the next day.
Yep.
And that's part and parcel of the job. It's very much like policing. Remember, I said you don't know where you're going to go, where you're going to end up, and what time you're going to get home. And but anyway.
Well, we've got the break fast approaching, but Jim's going to stick with us in the second half hour, and we're going to explore his thoughts on volunteerism and perhaps why you should consider it too. It's a really great thing, and I've really enjoyed sharing some of these great memories with him, and I hope you're enjoying it too. Stick with us, folks. We'll be back after this.
You're listening to The Clear Signal.
Welcome back, everyone. Great to have you with us this week, and I hope you're enjoying our chat this week with Jim Read. Jim is, of course, a retired Victoria Police member, a 40-plus year career there, and an even longer career, in fact, more than 50 years as a volunteer firefighter with Victoria's Country Fire Authority. Still ahead, also this half hour, we'll be discussing some issues pertaining to motorcycle ownership and motorcycle safety with the Motorcycle Riders Association of Australia. But as I said, Jim Read is still with us. You'd already been in the fire brigade for a long time before you came to Scoresby. And of course, I know you've been firefighter of the year at Wangaratta. You'd come to Scoresby. I think you might have received a similar award there. But you were the captain when I came. How do you see leadership? You were a sergeant in the police force, so that's obviously a leadership role as well. Were there facets that you could take from either side of that ledger to apply to the other?
A lot of that. I did the sub-officers course with Victoria Police, and that gave me a few more tools in my toolkit. But I think 99% of all my leadership qualities that you were talking about all come down to using my mouth, talking. It's the same in policing, country policing. 99% is that communication. And if you communicate well, if you communicate on a good lower level or on anyone's level, and you start off that way and you are positive, you are polite, you look at all the positives that the person does, and if they have negatives, then you offer them some improvements, opportunities for improvement, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, it's just being treating everyone like you would like to be treated yourself. And I think if you can, in certain situations when there's stress, there's jobs that need to be done and they need to be done urgently, if you can control your emotions, take that one step back and just look at the job, get to as many people to be able to do their jobs, and you know their skills and all the rest of it, and you work with them, it just flows. And at the end of the day, you can come back from a job that could have been highly stressful and everyone's reasonably unstressed. The job's got done, whether it be a policing job or a fire brigade job, and you can look at it and say, well, yeah, I think we did pretty well there. And if you didn't, you can say, well, there's a few things to look at, but we'll go through those and hopefully improve ourselves a little bit more.
Communication, I think, is key, as you mentioned there, Jim, and obviously leading by example is another. And I know that these days within CFA you have another mentoring role, helping newer brigade captains and newer brigade officers learn those really important skills. CFA
has a program called the Captain's Mentor Program, which has been running now for about 11 or 12 years. And older captains like myself, ex-captains, or those that have been in other areas, we take on board a new captain and we don't tell them what to do. We just ask, we become their mentor, and they come to us with their problem and we go, well, what do you reckon, what's the best way to get through that? What are you trying to achieve? What do you reckon is the best way that we can do that without that causing too many issues for everyone involved? And we look at those processes and then come up with an idea, and then so they bring the problem to you, you workshop it with them, but they make the end decision so that they feel good about that, and then they take it back to their brigade and action it. And from there, hopefully, in a few years' time, they'll be part of the Captain's Mentor Program, I should say, not problem, and be doing the same things yourself. But
Yeah.
It's just the communication. What do you got? What's your problem? How do you reckon you can get around that?
Yep.
What's a good way to do this? What's a good way to that? And move on and say, well, we'll try that.
And the Scoresby Fire Brigade too, one of the other things about that particular station is it's been a great breeding ground for people to go on into other areas within the volunteer fire service. In fact, I note with great interest that former Scoresby boy is a local brigade captain down where I live now in Stewie Bluck. And
yeah, well, you've got, there's 4 ex-Scoresby members that are the captains in your area. So you've got Marcus Harris who's looking after Cockatoo Brigade. Then you've got Justin Seddon, who's looking after Narmargoon. You've got Blucky, who's just got the job as captain down there at Clyde. And you've got Johnny Morris down at Hastings. So, but also Scorseby's been a great breeding ground for staff, professional firefighters getting paid. Like I think there's 18 or 19 of them currently working or have worked for MFB and CFA as station officers, firefighters, and also with my little twist, we built a lot of coffers too. So,
yes, well, that's very true too. That's very true too.
So we've been a good breeding ground for the CFA, the FRV, and Victoria Police.
And, of course, of that 19 that you mentioned there, of course, one of them is your son, Ricky, who's now a senior station officer in my local area. And
that's right.
A good friend and someone I've known since he was a junior, in fact. So it's great to see him.
Yeah, and Andrew Judds, he's a commander down there.
Yep.
He was at Scoresby too. And
there we go.
A wonderful array of people from the Scoresby Fire Brigade that have joined the service full-time, and they are going gangbusters. They're great.
Now, Jim, time's starting to run out against us, unfortunately, but I wanted to mention too that this is not only a Jim Read story, but it's a Read family story, a story of service, because we mentioned Ricky, your son. Of course, your daughter Kirsty spent time in the Navy.
She did. Yeah, she was driving HMAS Adelaide when I went into East Timor, so she's a return person.
Fantastic. And, of course, your wife, Sue, is also very heavily involved in community service and mentoring. In fact, I can tell folks that back when my daughter Rachel was quite young, she actually taught my daughter to swim. So there you go.
That's right. So she was a swimming instructor for many years, and about 25 years ago, she moved into disabled swimming. So because Andrew, our son, unfortunately developed a brain tumour in his brain stem, and his movements and everything else became quite erratic. And unfortunately, things haven't gone well for Andrew over the years. But it's turned our whole family into that sort of caring for people who have disabilities. My daughter, Kirsty, when she left the Navy, she's now the principal of the Bendigo Special Development School. And she's got 160 or 160 kids up there, and she's works. And she leaves home at 5 o'clock in the morning and gets home about 8 o'clock at night every night. With that, it's just a full on. My wife Sue, she did disabled swimming at the Glen Allen School in Glen Waverley, and once Andrew became crook, and we were dealing with that, the whole family's attitude changed to caring for people with disabilities, and that's continued on. And I'm very proud of the fact that the family is a service where hopefully, the Read family has improved someone else's lot somewhere else with their challenges, because I think we've got a lot of empathy in our family. And that's flowed on to the kids and people like yourself, Steve, where not everything goes well for the first time, and it's important that you have the resilience to keep going and pushing for better services and for a better lifestyle for the people that unfortunately don't have that.
You are just a unique family, Jim, and I don't just say that because we're talking. I have long admired all of you, and you've had a great impact on my life and many other lives as well. I want to thank you for that. We could talk for hours, Jim. I would really love to do it. I guess as we wrap up here, the spirit of volunteerism, would you have a message to people who are considering it and looking at it?
Absolutely. It's one of the best things you can do in your life, because at the end of your life, one will say to yourself, have I been good? Have I made a difference? And volunteering is it's akin to Australianism, and but I'll tell you a little story that I enjoyed is the fact that in 1985 or 86, you know how we always collected for the Royal Children's Hospital, Steve, on the corner of Stud Road and Furniture Gully Road.
I remember.
And we just had an influx of Asians into the country. And the car pulled up at the corner, and I had the little, the Royal Children's Hospital appeal tin, and I said, I want to give some money. He said, what, you want me to give you some money? And I said, yeah. He said, what for? And he said, I said, for the Royal Children's Hospital. And he goes, he didn't know anything about it. Anyway, 3 or 4 years later on, the same bloke pulled up, and I had the tin, and he said, is this for the kids? And I said, you betcha. He said, no worries, mate. And he put $10 in the tin.
Nice.
And I thought, mate, you've become an Aussie, and all those people that come from all over the world, and they all know about the Royal Children's Hospital appeal. They all know about volunteerism. You have a look in all our emergency service organisations. We used to just have white Anglo-Saxon males and females, and now you look at them, they're just a cosmopolitan wonderland, and the best thing about it is the food they bring.
Oh, yes.
They've all become good Aussies, mate, and that's fantastic. So, yeah, but they can't help not become a volunteer when they come to Australia, and we love it.
That's a great way to finish. Jim Read, so good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
No worries, Steve. Thanks for the opportunity.
The Clear Signal.
You're listening to The Clear Signal with me, Steve Visscher. Great to have you with us this week. A bit of Jack Johnson there, sitting, waiting, wishing. And I tell you what, when it's pretty miserable weather around Melbourne, as it has been, at least as we're recording the show at this point in time, it's been pretty miserable weather. Well, I'm sitting, waiting, wishing quite often that I could just get my motorcycle out of the garage and go out riding. That's something that I like to do for fun. But I tell you what, it can be a pretty dangerous pastime if you're not careful. That's for sure. And there's a lot of issues around motorcycling and motorcycle safety to discuss, and we're going to do that right now with Damien Codognotto, a spokesman for the Motorcycle Riders Association of Australia. Damien, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Steve.
Now, of course, I have a bit of skin in this game, Damien, because I'm a motorcycle rider myself. Sitting in my garage, I've got an old 2004 Honda 650 and a brand spanking new Yamaha, in fact, a 900. So, a lot of these topics around motorcycle safety and motorcycle ownership and the like are of great interest to me, and I hope they will be to our listeners too. Can you tell us a bit about the MRAA and what its role is in this space?
Well, the Motorcycle Riders Association began in Melbourne in 1978, and it wanted to keep its aim simple, which is road safety, fair and sensible laws and taxes, and a better image for motorcycling. And we developed from there. It grew very quickly in the early 80s, and it had branches in every capital city and sub-branches, I think 52 of them across the country. But when it all boils down, the changes in technology and communication changed the whole motorcycling scene, and I dare say many other scenes.
Yeah.
And so we now operate more online and direct face-to-face with members of parliament and officials and so on.
Advocacy in so many spaces like this is so important, and particularly I think these days where I suppose anecdotally, I know I see it, there seem to be more and more motorcyclists on the road. I see it a lot here in Melbourne where I live, and I'm sure you see it where you're riding as well. What are some of the factors, do you think, that are affecting bringing on this big increase in motorcycle ownership?
Well, the pure pleasure of riding a motorbike is part of it. But there's also economic pressures. As the last 10 years have been fairly stagnant wage growth in many areas, and now we have this cost of living crisis, and we have cities that are growing. In other words, the population is denser, and that means there's less room for cars. So more people are looking at alternatives, and they're finding it's easier to ride a small commuter motorbike than it is to pedal. So they're all contributing factors. The retarding factors are basically public service bias against motorcyclists, because they reckon the best way to improve motorbike safety is to reduce exposure to motorbikes.
Yeah, and to make it more expensive, it seems to me. A lot of people are moving into motorcycling to save a bit of money, but sometimes I've got to wonder how that balance is looking these days. It's becoming, like everything else, as you say, it's becoming quite expensive.
Well, it is, but you can still get a road-registered brand new electric scooter for under 10 grand. That's with your riding gear and so on. And the cheapest of the electric cars is probably 45,000. So when you consider running costs, tyres, charging the things, all of that, motorcycling is still going to be a really good option for someone in a city like Melbourne, where it's very spread out. So an electric scooter or a small motorbike, petrol-driven, is going to be a very good commuter.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned scooters. Some of the advances in that particular sector of motorcycling, I see some scooters now that are pretty high tech and actually quite high capacity, which probably goes a little bit against, I think, what most people think of them when you say, I'm going to ride a scooter, and people sort of scoff at that. But some of those scooters are pretty high tech these days.
Yeah, they are. They are. And they go as fast as anything on the freeway. So they're becoming popular in their own right, in their own sort of niche.
A lot of the talk that comes up, particularly in the media space when it comes to motorcycling, is the propensity for incidents, for motorcyclists to be involved in crashes and this sort of stuff. Are we seeing any stats on whether these incidents are rising? And if that's the case, is that on par with perhaps the increase in other forms of motoring in terms of incident increase?
Well, there's just a lot of problems to do with crash data. So if you look at crash data in Victoria, certain things just aren't collected at the crash site. For example, the make and model of the vehicles involved and so on. The favourite saying at Vic Roads and Co is that motorcycles are overrepresented in road trauma. That's based on the number of registered bikes, because that's the only way they can count them. And it's not compared to anyone else. So how do you know how many bicycles are out there for a start and how many are involved in crashes with cars? So, we think that's a bit of a misleading statement. The fact of the matter is that most vulnerable road users, pedestrians, bicyclists, toy vehicle operators and motorbike riders are hit by cars. That's just a fact of life.
Yeah, and I think that really highlights the importance when you're riding of having a good safety strategy and making sure you've got, that safety bubble. I know when you're learning to ride, instructors always harp on this. I suppose because there's not as many motorcyclists around, normal motorists do silly things too, but when we see I spend a lot of time on the Monash Freeway, for example, here in Melbourne, and you see some of my fellow riders taking some really hefty risks, which sort of highlights it in people's minds, I guess.
That's right, because it's not only that they're taking the risk, it's they're taking the risk with an audience. There's all those people in cars going, tut, 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 they're all crazy risk takers, and that leads to a lack of respect for motorcyclists on the road. So riders that are doing silly things anywhere on the road are really letting their side down. They're really doing us no favours at all.
What do you think is the importance of, placed on training, and I guess further training too, Damien? I think, I know that I did a course here in Melbourne when I learned to ride. It was run by a company that's operated by a bunch of ex-motorcycle policemen. It was really professionally done. I actually got a lot out of it. I sort of think now I've been sort of riding a few years, and I admit I took it up a bit later in life. I'm looking now going back and doing some advanced training now. I think it's like everything else, isn't it? You've got to really stay up on this sort of stuff, and with extra traffic being on the road these days being a real factor, I think that's even more important.
It is. When I got my learner's permit, I turned up at the police centre or station in Carlton, and the motorcycle policeman that was doing the test, or my learner's permit test, looked out and it was drizzling rain. So he said, shoot up the shops, get me a thing of milk and bring it back. And when I got back, he had written it out. So the only training I got was through the club scene. And my uncle, who was a rally driver, and he said to me that, because I bought a Royal Enfield 125, and he said, if you want to stay alive on that thing, what you do is you take off the horn, take off the blinkers, any of that stuff, you don't want any of that on it, and you ride it nude in peak hour traffic across the city. And if you survive that, then you'll know how to ride. And the point he was making, of course, was you're vulnerable, so you've got to accept your limitations.
Yep.
You've just got to look out for yourself.
Which I suppose brings me to another really important thing, and I wonder too, Damien, I see motorcyclists sometimes taking risks with their gear. Somebody said to me, I remember this saying right from the start, all of the gear all the time. So anytime I go riding, I take the time to suit up and put all of my safety gear on. You know, do you think that message is lost on some riders sometimes? I see guys riding around in jeans and all sorts of things, and you think, gee whiz, if you come off that bike, it doesn't really matter who's at fault, does it? I mean, you're going to be in some serious strife.
Well, again, it's you've got to know your own limitations, and unless you're wearing the right clothing, then you're vulnerable. If you want to see how the right clothing really works to save you in a crash, watch the motorbike racing, and see some of those guys come off, and they slide along the ground and bounce about and all of that stuff, and the leathers or the material they're wearing, the suits and the body armour and so on, they come off at 200 kilometres per hour, and then they get up and run over and try to pick up their bike.
I know.
So it really works.
I was speaking with Damien Codognotto from the Motorcycle Riders Association of Australia. Damien, you talk about back when you did your licence. How long have you been riding for these as we speak?
I bought a Royal Enfield in 1967, and I think probably sometime in December 67 I got my learner's permit.
And we really talk about that's such a long time riding, and as you talked about earlier on when we first started the interview, there's a lot of joy. It's just a lot of fun, isn't it? It's a lot of fun to do. It's
fantastic to do. If you do it right and you get in the right gear and you just line up that corner and you come out the other side perfect and you just feel elated, you know. I've done a good job on that one. So there's that, but there's also the camaraderie in road motorcycling. Simple things like you stop for any reason by the road and another bike will come past and he'll wave and to let you know. You know, if you wave him on, you're saying, I'm okay. But there's a concern there. And, of course, that is really very good. And the partying's not bad either.
Well, that's very true. You know, one of the things I noticed, speaking of camaraderie, is, you'd be riding along and you'll pass another motorcyclist. Quite often it's just a bit of a nod, bit of a head nod. G'day, mate, how you going? And there is just that kind of acknowledgement that, hey, we're out here doing this and having a lot of fun. The MRAA, of course, as you mentioned, they get out there and you do really talk to politicians and really lobby that way. How generally do you find you're received when you talk to them?
Yeah, well, it depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to a politician that's sympathetic to your cause, you'll wind up in an office or a boardroom and you'll be treated as a credible source. If you're talking to someone who is really biased against motorcycling, and they exist, you wind up in a cafeteria or a storeroom or something. And the minute you see the venue for the meeting, you know straight away what the position of the MP or the official is. But in general, whilst we don't suffer fools gladly, we tend to work with respect for these people, and quite often we achieve things.
Well, it's great work that you do, and it's very important work that you do. And I see this in a lot of other areas of life, particularly I have a bit of a background in aviation, and we've seen there the importance of political lobbying when it comes to that industry or that sector of transport. So I really appreciate the work that you do on behalf of all riders. Damien, where can people find the association online, and how can they join if they want to?
The membership is free, and you can go to mraa.net.au. And you'll find the membership form and so on. And we really need members because there's strength in numbers. If you have a lot of members, then you can say to government, we are a sizable voting bloc. We have some very qualified people, and our aims are about safety.
Fantastic. I'll tell you what, Damien, I could talk about the joys of motorcycling with you all day long, but time is against us, unfortunately. Damien, thanks so much for joining us today, and I hope we can talk again.
My pleasure.
And that wraps up a pretty packed hour here on the Clear Signal. It's been a great show. Thanks very much for joining us. I hope you've got a lot out of our two discussions this week, certainly talking about motorcycling issues there with Damien. And, of course, thanks also to Jim Read for giving us some of his time today. As you can tell, I have enormous amount of respect for Jim, and I'm not the only one either. He's a very, very special person, and he's had a great positive impact on many, many people's lives, and it was a real privilege to be able to tell at least part of his story here on this week's show. We'll be back next week with another great edition, a couple of more great guests and a couple of more great stories to tell. Until we speak again, have fun, stay safe, enjoy life, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Get in touch. Join the conversation. Find us online at clearsignal.com.au.
Southern Skies Media.